Section 9 of The Purple Sapphire and Other Posthumous Papers by Christopher Blayre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Cheetah-Girl, Part 1. Deposited by the Professor of Physiology in the University of Cosmopoli. Note of explanation. The note by my publishers on page 211 requires an explanation which circumstances rendered it both difficult and desirable to offer in that place. The 7 published manuscripts were selected by me from among a large number of which I had become custodian, as explained in my antiscript to the Purple Sapphire, and at the same time I brought away with me from the safe in the University Library for perusal the manuscript of the Cheetah-Girl. This manuscript, though setting forth the principles of an inquiry and experiments in a branch of biological research the importance of which it would be impossible to overestimate, contains matters of record of such a nature that it could not possibly be published in a volume destined for public circulation. The table of contents was, however, compiled from the title covers of the manuscripts by my secretary, who, I may mention parenthetically, made the mistake of writing, deposited by the professor of biology instead of physiology. There is no chair of general biology in the University of Cosmopoli. This table went to the printers after my departure from England on a protracted holiday, and was set up with the rest of what is technically called the preliminary matter. When, on my return, my publishers asked for this manuscript, I considered that I was justified in showing it to them in confidence, and they at once agreed with me that it could not be printed. Hence, the note, which reviewers have regarded some in the light of a joke, and some as a touch of intentional sensationalism. Christopher Blayre. The Cheetah-Girl. I have spent a long and very tiring day in London, and I have come home, worn out physically and mentally. But I have settled all my worldly affairs, and am, I think, prepared for any eventuality. I am now ready, therefore, to kill my wife on the first opportunity that offers. I have written that deliberately, so as to see and to realize how terrible it looks. Written down to stiffen myself, so to speak, for, if it be possible, I admire my wife even more today than I did when we set out upon our wonderful honeymoon, just over 3 months ago. But, terrible as it is to contemplate, she must die as soon as possible. The welfare of the race demands her death. There is bound to be an inquest, and I dread even now what the post-mortem examination of her beautiful body may reveal. The manner of her death I have thought out and decided upon, and there is not, I believe, the slightest possibility of my being connected in the remotest degree with the tragedy. But I have deemed it expedient to make such arrangements as regards my affairs as may become necessary in the event of my being hung for murder. For I should not offer any defense or explanation of my act. I owe that to her mother, to my predecessor in the chair of physiology in the university, and to the memory of 3 months of the most passionate happiness which have ever fallen to the lot of man. And even if I did explain my action, would my explanation be believed? Perhaps it might. In the light of proofs I could bring forward, but would life be possible for me among human beings afterwards? 1,000 times no. But I owe it to science to record the circumstances which have led to the step I am henceforth seeking the opportunity to take. I shall deposit this record with the registrar of the university, with precautions that it shall not be read until many years have elapsed after my death. I have no near relations, and I shall not marry again. Therefore, no one living can be hurt. And, in any case, the facts I have to record, whilst of paramount importance to the physiologists in the future, can never be given any wide publicity. If, indeed, they can be imparted to anyone at all, excepting under the seat of professional secrecy. Thus much by way of introduction. My record must commence with the year 19 blank, when, having taken my degrees of Doctor of Medicine and Doctor of Science, I was appointed assistant and demonstrator to Professor Paul Barrowdale, F.R.S., Professor of Psychology in the University of Cosmopoli. With our academic duties I am not concerned now, and the records, so far as they could be published of the research work done in the laboratory of that daring and brilliant physiologist, are to be found scattered among pages of the contemporary journals of science. It is with our personal relations that I am constrained to deal. These became, almost from their inception, of the most intimate nature. In our work in the university, I recognized in him a brilliant master. He recognized in me a devoted and assiduous pupil. Outside our professional connection, our tastes, our views, were strangely identical. He was no narrow-minded or ascetic scientist, and away from the university, his appreciation of the pleasures of life, of wine, women, and song, of travel, literature, and art, found a ready response in me, and we became confidential friends and companions, to a degree which is very rare between a professor and his assistant. There was only one subject upon which he never touched, even in our moments of closest intimacy and confidence, and in regard to which I never attempted to break the seal of silence which he had imposed upon himself and tacitly upon me. This subject was Mrs. Clayton. As regards this lady, though the gossip which is indigenous to a university town no doubt from time to time formulated theories, for Barrowdale was a free-living bachelor, was, as such, looked askant upon by many of the professorial staff and their wives. No one would ever come out in the open, so to speak, for the all-sufficient reason that any scandal openly promulgated would have to be rapidly sterilized, should Barrowdale have shown any signs of wanting to marry any daughter of the university, and much will be tacitly ignored in a bachelor professor of more than ample private means. Mrs. Clayton lived in a charming little house about 3 miles out of the town. It was understood that Barrowdale was her trustee, and had charge of her business affairs. There was a child, a girl, whom no one ever saw, but whether the child was born after Mrs. Clayton's arrival in the neighborhood, or before that event, no one was in a position to say. One academic lady, with daughters, had gone so far as to ascertain that the child, whose curious name was Unica, was not registered at birth in the district registry. Beyond this nothing was known. Barrowdale never afforded any intelligence, and if, as was whispered from time to time with bated breath, à 4 yeux, she was his daughter, there was nothing on record to convey the slightest indication or a priori evidence of the fact. I saw her once. I was walking with Barrowdale, and we met Mrs. Clayton and the child, an ugly, sallow, swarthy little thing, who struck me as singularly repellent and uninteresting. Mrs. Clayton was a nervous, faded person, gentle in manner and appearance, but quite unnoticeable. She went nowhere and knew no one. Neither mother nor daughter interested me in the least. Now and then I believed an undergraduate would refer contemptuously to old Barrowdale's woman, but there was no talk in the university sense of the word. Several years passed by during which our work in the laboratory and schools and our pleasures and companionship grew more and more intimately connected, so much so that I refused the offer of a professorship in a northern university rather than be separated from Barrowdale, for the work we were engaged upon was of the highest physiological importance. He was grateful to me for this, and I know that he never lost an opportunity of impressing upon the authorities that I was his natural and indicated successor in the chair of physiology on his death or retirement. This came about one day with appalling suddenness. Barrowdale had been seedy, nervy, off-color for several days. He had been out more than once to see Mrs. Clayton, as I knew, and one evening came home tired to death and drenched to the skin. The next day he was in a high fever. In the evening septic pneumonia of a most virulent type set in, and in 24 hours he was dead. I found that he had made me, together with his solicitor, a worthy old man in London, his executor and trustee. He provided an annuity of £600 a year for Mrs. Clayton, which on her death devolved to Unica. The rest of his property, he being apparently alone in the world, was bequeathed to the university. The good woman, who seemed absolutely paralyzed by the death of Barrowdale, came into Cosmopoli to see me whenever her affairs required an interview, always the same nervous, uninteresting creature. I confessed I hoped she would be led on some occasion to speak of Unica's father, but in spite of 1 or 2 leads, she never followed, and being really quite uninterested in the matter, I never tried to press the subject. In due course, almost mechanically, I succeeded Barrowdale in the chair of physiology, and I had neither time nor inclination to concern myself about my two sestues que trusten. We come then by effluxion of time to the end of last term. The men were due to go down for the long vacation next day, and I had made all arrangements for a protracted tour down the Loire and through the Midi of France. I may mention that Barrowdale left me by his will the comfortable and comforting legacy of £10,000. Some paper came to me on this memorable day from my co-trustee, connected with a change of investment, which required Mrs. Clayton's signature. There was no time to communicate by post, so I jumped into my two-seater and ran out to her house. I rang the bell, and the door was opened by the most beautiful being that I had ever seen in my life, and I'd seen a good many. "Mrs. Clayton?" I began. "Mother is out," she replied. "You are Professor Magley? Please come in." She held out her hand, which I took, and without letting go of mine, she drew me into their sitting room, a cozy little place furnished with great taste, Barrowdale's taste, and strewn with fur rugs which gave off a warm, sensuous perfume. The touch of the girl's hand was electrical. It sent a thrill of intense desire up my arm to my brain, and when she dropped my hand and stood before me, her lips parted in a smile more provoking than anything of the kind I had ever seen. I was simply struck dumb, and stood looking at her, my heart beating violently. She was a lithe creature of rather more than average stature, draped rather than dressed in a kind of dull red silk wrapper, confined at the waist by a suede leather belt. It folded across her breasts, one of which, perfect in form, almost escaped from the folds, and came down to just below her knees. Her legs were bare, and her feet were shod in fur-lined slippers. I verily believed that, save for this garment, she was naked. Her face was indescribable, a mass of purple-black hair gathered into a loose bunch on the top of her head, thick dark eyebrows shadowing long lazy eyes, which seemed to me to be enormous, her complexion a tawny russet brown, with a suspicion of down on the cheeks, and more than a suspicion of it at the corners of her upper lip. She had let her hands fall by her sides, and as she looked at me with that marvelous smile, the tip of a crimson tongue passed slowly across her lower lip from one side to the other. I was struck, even at that wonderful moment, by the comparative prominence of her little canine teeth, which gave an indescribable and characteristic charm to her smile. Without saying a word, and, I declare, without any conscious volition of my own, I held out my arms, and she stepped forward into them. I crushed her body to me, and our lips joined. I thought until then that I knew what it was to be kissed. I did not. The lingering passion of Unica's kiss was unlike anything I had ever dreamed of as possible. Her tongue which sought mine was strangely long and firm, and even in the delirium of the moment it seemed to me that her lingual papillae were accentuated almost to the point of roughness, but the exquisite power of it defies words. Her arms were round me, her legs were twisted into mine, and I think I should have fallen had she not gently disengaged herself, and, still holding me by one arm, she drew me towards a low divan covered with fine skins, from which I had evidently aroused her. As she reached it, she flung herself down upon the skins, and as she fell, one beautifully modeled leg, bare to mid-thigh, escaped from the folds of her wrapper. She raised her arms to me in a gesture of divine invitation, and at that moment the door opened and Mrs. Clayton came in. I do not know what was to be read from my face as I turned towards her, but if it was a reflection of Unica's, Mrs. Clayton must have been blind indeed if she did not take in the situation at a glance. I began very haltingly to utter apologies and to explain my visit. She was obviously very much upset and distressed, but all she said was, in short, disjointed sentences, I see. I could not have expected. No one comes here. I should not have gone out. I never do. Please bring the papers in here." And she led me into the dining room, where there were pens and so on. All this time Unica had not moved or uttered a sound, but just lay curled up luxuriously on the divan, watching me with her huge eyes, and, as it were, swaying her beautiful smile from side to side. I cannot describe it otherwise. The slipper had fallen from the foot of the leg which still lay unconcernedly outside her sarong, and here was the only movement that she made. The toes opened and shut and curled inwards towards the palm of her foot, with a regulated movement which seemed to me to be indicative of extreme and perfect luxury. Mrs. Clayton signed the papers, with a shaky hand, it is true, but said nothing about Unica. The silence becoming oppressive, I thought it obvious and tactful to say, "Your daughter has grown into a very striking young woman." "Yes, very," replied the poor woman nervously. "Very. I never leave her if I can help it, but, expecting no one, I went in next door for something. The servant is out, and so—" She tailed off incoherently, and I saw that I was distressing her, so I took my leave as casually as I could, with my blood boiling in my veins and my heart throbbing. When I got outside, I took a deep breath, but I seemed saturated with the tense, sensuous perfume of Unica's room and of Unica herself, for, whether it was contact with her divan or what, her whole body gave off a perfume for which there was only one word. It was intoxicating, slightly savage. It clung to me all the way back to my rooms, and even afterwards when I'd opened all the windows. I need hardly say that I could not get her out of my thoughts all day, nor did I want to. And I dreamed a dream. Next morning, as I went on with my packing and the college was rapidly emptying of the men off on long vacation, I said to myself, "Look here, my son, you are that girl's guardian. Barrowdale has entrusted her to you. It's a damned good thing that you are off tomorrow for 3 months, and when you get back again, keep clear of it." Thus I apostrophized myself, and knew that I wanted Unica more than anything else in the world. By the afternoon the college was practically empty, and I had finished my packing and was trying to read an abstruse German treatise on cytology. But I couldn't. My senses were on edge, unnaturally keen. Hypertrophied, as it were. I heard a step in the quad. It slithered up my stair. A rap on the door. I knew who it was before the door was flung open. In an instant we were in one another's arms. The long witchery of her kiss, the invitation of her magical tongue, everything was my dream come true. I had in my rooms a divan no less vivid with willing complicity than the one at the cottage. We fell upon it without a word, and, in spite of the fact that Unica was in a physical condition in which it is customary for young women to withhold themselves from active caress, we gave ourselves up to one another naturally, unthinkingly, in a whirlwind orgy of exquisite possession and ecstasy. Presently, when we were able to talk, for until then not a word had been uttered on either side, I asked her how she had got away. "Mother's had a sleepless night," she said, "and this afternoon she locked the front and back doors and went to bed. I got out of the window. I wanted you so frightfully." An hour passed in a delirium of sensuous delight which cannot be hinted at, not from motives of reticence, for I am determined to record here the absolute facts as they occurred, without any periphrasis, but because the marvel that was Unica simply beggars and defies description. I thought I had known passion. Fool! I had never even touched its fringe. If Unica was wonderful to behold in her dull red sarong, what was she naked? No painter or sculptor ever imagined, much less reproduced so perfect a body. Her beautiful breasts stood out in perfect proportion, the nipples prominent and surrounded with a silky aureole of tiny purple curls, tender and fascinating. Her auxiliary hair was phenomenally thick, and I speedily found that to be kissed and petted under her arms drove her frantic with delight. I have had reason to remember and be thankful for this, as will be seen later. The whole of her body was covered with the light soft down such as is seen upon many fair women, but upon Unica it was deeper in shade than usual, and it was punctuated here and there with little streaks, and sometimes almost circles of a still deeper tone. From her navel downwards it increased into a glorious mass of pubic hair, which extended from hip to hip, and though so dense was of the most amazingly soft texture, covering the whole of the lower stomach and intercrural space with a veritable fourrure. It was wonderful, and, to repeat the only adjective which describes any of Unica's esoteric attributes, intoxicating. Her forearms and legs were deliciously hirsute, and even up and down her spine a narrow furry band invited one's most ingenious caresses. Whoever gave her the name of Unica knew what he was about, prophetically. We were lying in one another's arms, whispering passionate secrets to one another, I in a silk bathrobe and she clad only in her wonderful skin and hair, when the door, which we had never thought of locking, was flung open, and Mrs. Clayton stood before us, frankly petrified and aghast. I sprang to my feet and burst into words. "Do not misjudge us," I cried. "We love one another as I never dreamed it possible to love. We shall be married at once. I will get a license tomorrow, and next day Unica will be my wife. Forgive us the passion that has made us irresistible to one another. You will understand, I am sure. You are a woman who has loved, and you are her mother. Now you will have a devoted son as well as a daughter." I paused. Mrs. Clayton had not said a word. She had fallen into a chair, and, ashy white, looked back and forth, from me to Unica, who, utterly unconscious of her exquisite nakedness, lay on the divan looking at us, with the same wonderful smile that had overwhelmed and held me, her crimson tongue passing to and fro across her lower lip. Then Mrs. Clayton got up, apparently with an effort, and she said, "No, no, no. It cannot. It can never be. You don't know. Oh, I am a wicked woman. At these times she is not responsible for what she does. And besides, she knows nothing. I never let her out of my sight until the danger is over. Let me take her away." "But, my dear lady," I said, "reflect a moment. We must be married now. We are both, I comparatively, young, and for a university professor I am rich. I will be the best of husbands to her, the best of sons to you. Our old friend Barrowdale would have wished it, I am sure. I was his favorite, his only intimate friend." At Barrowdale's name the poor woman started as if she had been stung. "No, no, no," she cried again. "He would not. He would have killed himself and her, rather. It has all been so sudden. I have not had time. Forgive me, for God's sake, and let me take her away." "Well, then, let us be engaged for a short while," I said ineptly. "No, never. She must never marry. She can't. Oh, don't torture me." There was no reasoning with her. She was like a madwoman. Unica stood up in all her glorious statuesque nudity and allowed her mother to dress her with shaking hands, whilst I looked on. I cut a poor figure. When she was dressed, Mrs. Clayton took her away. She went without casting a look in my direction. I was simply stunned. I can give no description of the phantasmagoria of my thoughts for the rest of the afternoon and evening. One thing was certain. I could not leave England without having this matter cleared up and placed upon a proper, the only possible, basis. I thought and thought. What mad idea could the woman have? I tried to reason it out. I racked my brains for an explanation, but found none. The girl was alive with passion. She was predestined to fall into the hands of some casual sensualist. What better solution, if her passion was in part or in any way pathological, than to give her to a husband who would look after her? I wearied myself with thoughts and tumbled into bed at midnight. At 3 a.m. I was awakened by a rapping at my door. I started into vivid wakefulness. It could only be Unica. It was. I subsequently learned that she had got past the porter with a statement that her mother had sent with her a message of vital urgency, and with other inducement. "I've got away again, sweet lover of mine," she said, as I took her in my arms. "Mother is mad, I think. Hide me, and take me away with you. Marry me or not, I don't care. I love you and want you so frightfully that I could kill anyone who stood between us." What was I to do? I wanted her just as badly as she wanted me. She wanted to be loved, had, there and then, but I, with that practical good sense which I flatter myself distinguishes me, made coffee and toast and an omelette, and made her eat with me. Then we stole down and got past the heavily bribed porter. Remember, term was over, and he was once more a human being, and I no longer a professor. Reached the garage, carrying my bags, which were already packed, got out the car, and made a beeline for London, where we put up at a quiet West Central hotel. Next day I visited my co-trustee early, whilst Unica went shopping. She had, of course, come away wholly unprovided with any sort of trousseau. I confided the facts in outline to my co-trustee, who was horribly shocked, got a special license at Doctors' Commons, and in the shortest possible time we were married at a registry and fled. Yes, we absolutely fled to Paris. From Paris we both wrote to Mrs. Clayton announcing the inevitable, irredeemable event. But we gave her no address, merely saying that we should be away for at least 3 months, and would send an address for her to write to and forgive us. The only person to whom I confided my whereabouts was the horrified lawyer. I could, in normal circumstances, take a vivid pleasure in recalling and recording the amazement and delight of the most wonderful honeymoon that was ever granted to mortal man. Unica, who, to my surprise, I found had never been further from her home than Cosmopoli, was delighted, not childishly but wonderingly, with everything she saw. The beauty of nature, of art, of architecture, of antiquity, filled her with deep happiness, which, oddly enough, was merged with her in a deep sensual enjoyment of life. Keenly intelligent and interested in everything she saw, whenever she found herself in surroundings of exceptional beauty, a thrill of passion would come over her which rapidly communicated itself to me. And the wayside scenery of La Vendée and the Bocage, the ruins of departed civilization, 100 spots in western and southern France where we stopped the car to roam at will, come back to my mind as scenes beautified to memory by the most exquisite physical delights. The natural disturbance of her system in which we made our flight from Cosmopoli seemed to ripen her physical and mental faculties to the highest point, but whenever this was past, she displayed a power of response to emotional stimuli which I sometimes almost fear would wear her out. But we were determined not to climb mountains until we reached them, and lived long days and marvelous nights, unimagined by the most poetic and fantastic dreamers of the East. It was at Avignon one morning, as she was lying in my arms watching the sun rise through our open window, that she said with her lips on mine, "Rex, we are going to have a child." It needed but that to complete our happiness, though from that moment the joy we had in one another became more reasonable, perhaps a little less passionate. I could always rouse her to an ecstasy of desire by caressing and playing with the wonderful masses of hair under her arms, and her desire appeased, could always soothe her to sleep by the same means. But her passion for me as a male had to some extent given place in her to a fierce maternity. As soon as she knew that she was pregnant, she never had any doubt about it, she wrote announcing her news to her mother, and we anxiously awaited her reply, for we felt that this would put the finishing touch to her mother's forgiveness and reconcile her to the marriage she had so strenuously opposed. A week passed by, and then I received a telegram from my co-trustee. It said, "Mrs. Clayton has died suddenly under distressing circumstances. Please return at once." I was horrified, and wondered how I should break the news to Unica. We were sitting in the palace of the Caesars, quite alone that afternoon, and I thought it a good opportunity. I began, "Darling, I've had bad news today." "Have we got to go back? I shan't mind much. I've got my baby." She always talked of it as if it were already born. "No, darling," I replied. "It's about your mother." She looked at me quite gravely and said, "Is she dead?" I could not help feeling a little shocked. She might have been asking if lunch was ready. I began, "You must not take it too much to heart. You've got me." "And I've got my baby. What does anything else matter? When do we go home?" I was chilled, but in the circumstances it was better that she should take it like this than that she should suffer paroxysms of grief. She accepted the situation quite calmly. When I told her that she should now have 600 pounds a year of her own, she said, "I shall not have to spend any of it, shall I? You are quite rich. I shall save it all for my baby." She never said "our baby." Then she said, "Do you think Professor Barrowdale was my father?" This was a blow between the eyes, and I said rather lamely, "Well, I have often wondered about it myself, but he never told me anything about it. Did your mother never say anything about your father?" I was curious that we had never touched upon this subject before.
"No," she answered. "I never asked her but once, and then she seemed dreadfully upset, and said I must never speak to her about my father. She could not bear to think about it."
After a pause, she added,
"I don't think Professor Barrowdale was my father. I never felt like it, and I don't think I should have. If he seemed more interested in me, and how I got on with lessons and things, and how I was growing up, than really fond of me. Sometimes I fancied that he disliked me, that I repugned him," one of her words. "But anyhow, he must have been an awfully good man. See how he looked after us?"
"He was a good man," I answered stoutly. "No one ever knew what a lot of fine things he did, especially for women, the sort of women you have never heard of, women who had come to grief and were down and out."
"Do you mean prostitutes?"
I was ceasing to be amazed at my wife's sudden remarks, which from time to time showed an esoteric knowledge of the world. Gathered I am at a loss to know how or whence. "Well," I said, "that is about it."
"I don't wonder he was so good to them. It seems awful for men to be so down upon girls who are what I should have been, and proud of it, if you hadn't married me. After all, they are responsible, aren't they?"
"Perhaps."
"And yet, I don't know. I wanted you so frightfully the moment I saw you that you could not have helped having me. No one can say you seduced me."
And thereupon this amazing girl turned to other subjects as if this had been an ordinary dinner-party conversation. But I never loved her more than I did then, or, for that matter, more than I do now. In truth, I could reply when, as she often did, she asked me,
"How much do you love me, Rex?"
A little more than I did yesterday, but not so much as I shall tomorrow. And then by a 3 days' journey, for I was anxious in the circumstances that she should travel easily, we came back to London, and the world crashed into ruins around me, and the light went out of my life forever. Ich hab geliebt und gelebt. We arrived one evening of the late summer, and put up at the same hotel as that which sheltered us when we fled from Cosmopoli. And next morning I called upon my co-trustee, who received me with grave and forbidding formality. It was clear from his manner that he regarded me as a perverter of youth, and incidentally as a murderer. I tried to open the conversation upon conventional lines. "This is a most unfortunate circumstance," I began. He interrupted me. "It is more than unfortunate, it is deeply tragic." "You mean Professor Magley," he replied. "It is not my duty, nor have I the inclination, to sit in judgment upon your actions, or even to express an opinion, though of course I hold an opinion which I should be loath to express. I will confine myself to the facts. When you eloped, is, I believe, the technical expression, with Mrs. Clayton's daughter, she came up to town and saw me. She was quite dazed, stunned by what she termed the catastrophe. I will admit that she seemed to regard your action with a horror which, bad as it was, appeared to me exaggerated, seeing that you had repaired your fault, as far as it could be repaired by rapid marriage. She bitterly blames herself for having so far relaxed her vigilance as to make the meeting between yourself and our ward possible. But the extraordinary, if I may say so, the indecent rapidity with which these events took place made it impossible for her to do her duty as she expressed it. What may have been that duty and what the views entertained by herself and by the late Professor Barrowdale as to her daughter's future may be, I cannot conjecture, nor did she enlighten me, but I gathered that she had solemnly sworn to prevent her daughter's marriage if it were possible, by the revelation of certain facts known only to herself and the late Professor. Of what these may have been I have no idea, but I gather that they are contained in a written statement which it becomes my duty to deliver to you. I saw her no more after this interview, but I went down to Cosmopoli to see after her affairs, and to attend the inquest."
"The inquest?"
"Yes. You have not seen the papers this morning?"
"No. I arrived last night, and came straight here this morning."
"It took place yesterday, and her remains were buried in the parish churchyard yesterday afternoon. It was her wish that neither you nor her daughter should see her again. She was right. It was no sight for a young woman who expects to become a mother."
"Then you know?"
"Yes, one moment. I learned from her servant that on a receipt of a letter from our ward in which she announced her condition, Miss Clayton spent 2 days without moving from her chair, refusing to eat or to see such neighbors as she had admitted to a slight acquaintance. On the morning of the 3rd day, the servant, entering the sitting-room, which this unhappy lady had not left, found her lying upon the divan, which was soaked in her blood. She had cut her throat inexpertly with a common penknife. She must have bled slowly to death. The windpipe was not severed, and the jugular vein only just sufficiently wounded to allow the blood to escape, comparatively slowly. She had left a letter for me which you had better read." He handed me a sheet of paper scrawled over with incoherent sentences. It said, "I cannot face it. I am a coward. I knew I should be when the time came. I ought to have, but I had no chance. I am going to kill myself. I cannot face Unica. She must never know. I promised Paul B. that when a man wanted to marry her, I would give him the papers. I had no time. If I had had time, I know I could not. Mr. Magley must see them, no one else, not even you. You have them, the packet I gave you when Paul B. died. He will understand. What he will do, I forgive him. It wasn't his fault. It was my fault. He will understand when he reads. God help him and her. It must not be." Ursula Clayton. "What does it mean?" I asked, in a voice which I hardly recognized as my own. "I do not know. But, Professor Magley, I own that I am terrified, and that I am deeply sorry for you. Paul Barrowdale was a strange man. There were episodes in his earlier life that no one knew about, and what I could guess from collateral evidence and on occasional hint which he dropped appalled me, hardened me as I am by a long professional career to the wilder aberrations of the human mind. Not that Paul Barrowdale was mentally affected. No one was ever more sane, but he indulged what seemed to me to be terrible and morbid curiosities. Though my views as to your conduct remain unaltered, believe me, I am deeply sorry for you. For I fear that the punishment of your crime, I put it as high as that, may be almost more than any human being should be called upon to bear. Mind, I know nothing, I can only guess, and my brain reels when I allow myself to wander into conjecture. I will now give you the packet of papers to which Mrs. Clayton refers in her letter. I had some difficulty in keeping them from the coroner on the grounds of professional confidence, and that the papers were not hers but Barrowdale's, and consequently the property of yourself and me as his executors." And with that, the lawyer handed me a large square envelope, sealed at every flap with Paul Barrowdale's private seal. "If I may add a word of advice," continued he, "I would earnestly beg you not to open this envelope until you and your wife are settled in whatever house you have provided, or will provide, for her. Until that is done, you will require all your presence and concentration of mind. I will not hide from you the fact that these incidents are likely to have a significant influence upon your career and position in the university." My mouth was as dry as a morphinomaniac's. I felt deathly cold to the tips of my fingers and toes. I felt that my world was collapsing and that I was being buried in the wreck and ruin of forces of which I was utterly ignorant. I hardly know how I got back to Unica. Fortunately, she was quite calm and showed no curiosity as to my co-trustee. A few days passed, during which I went down to Cosmopoli and took a small furnished house in the town, and instinctively I engaged the girl who had been in Mrs. Clayton's service to come and attend to us. Whether it was an effect of the nervous tension in which I was living, the sense of impending horror, conscience, if you will, I do not know, but it seemed to me as if the few acquaintances whom I met looked curiously and askant upon me, avoided me, rather. My one object now was to get settled and to know the worst. I brought Unica down to Cosmopoli, where she took to her new abode like a cat to a new and comfortable basket. She never mentioned her mother. My precautionary warning to the servant not to go into details with the ineradicable gusto of her class was unnecessary. Unica did not go out at all. She lay most of the day on the divan which I had installed in conformity with which I knew to be her inclination, and did not appear to notice that in these days passion was utterly dead within me. At night she curled up by my side with her arms and legs wound round me as if I had been a sister to her, and slept peacefully whilst I lay awake listening to the university clocks and praying for daylight. I put off the opening of Paul Barrowdale's envelope from day to day. I was afraid. I told myself that I must get my nerves into stable condition before I undertook the perusal of... what? The time came, however, when I pulled myself together and determined to solve the mystery. And one evening, it was about a month ago, when Unica had gone to bed, I broke the seals. I read. And all the time, continuously it seemed to me, the university clocks cut off and flung into the rag-bag of the past, section after section of my life. End of section 9.